Somerset, England, April 1835. Rain drummed against the leaded windows of Wexford Cottage with a persistence that matched the ache in Seraphina Theodora Hartwell's bones as she sat beside the dying woman who had been her only friend for 20 years. The Dowager Countess of Wexford lay propped against embroidered pillows, her breathing shallow and labored, her once bright eyes now clouded with the approach of death. In her trembling hand, she clutched a sealed letter, its wax already softening in the heat from the fireplace. "You must read it after I am gone," the Dowager whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. "I have carried this burden too long, my dear. 20 years of watching you suffer for a crime you did not commit." Seraphina's heart constricted with a familiar pain, sharp as a stay, she had learned to bear for 2 decades. At 41 years old, she had made peace with her exile from the glittering world that had cast her out. Or so she told herself in the long, quiet hours when memory crept through her carefully constructed defenses. If stories of love that defies time and redeems the past, move your heart, subscribe now, and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. The letter felt heavy in her hands 3 days later as she stood alone in the cramped sitting room, the funeral already concluded, the few mourners already departed. Outside, spring sunshine mocked the darkness that had settled over her future. Without the Dowager's protection and modest stipend, she would need to seek another position, another family willing to take in a woman with a ruined reputation and no references beyond those of a recently departed benefactress whose reputation was tenuous. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The Dowager's spidery handwriting covered 3 pages, each word carefully chosen, each sentence a revelation that would shatter the carefully constructed prison Seraphina had inhabited for 2 decades. "My dearest Seraphina," the letter began. "By the time you read this, I will have left this world, and with my departure, I release you from a burden that was never yours to carry. 20 years ago, on the night of the Almack's opening ball in 1815, I witnessed a crime that destroyed your life. I have remained silent out of cowardice, out of fear of my own family's scandal, but I can carry this secret no longer into eternity. I saw Lady Constance Hartwell place the Valancourt diamond necklace into your reticule as you danced. I watched her whisper to Lady Sefton, watched the patronesses descend upon you like harpies, watched your world crumble as you were accused of theft before the entire assembly. I said nothing, God forgive me, because Constance was my goddaughter, and I could not bear to see her ruined. But there is more, and this revelation will pain you most deeply. The young man who stood beside you that night, who was promised to you since childhood by contract between your families, was Edmund Fitzwilliam Cordell, then newly invested as Duke of Montfort. When the accusation came, he did not defend you. He believed the lies, broke the betrothal contract publicly, and left you to face the scandal alone. His betrayal, more than the false accusation, sealed your fate. Know this truth, my dear. Constance desired him with ruinous intensity. She had loved him since they were children, though he never noticed her. When your betrothal was announced, her jealousy consumed her. She orchestrated your destruction with calculated cruelty, and she won. Within a year, she had secured a marriage to Viscount Hartley, though it brought her little happiness. The necklace was never recovered because it was never stolen. Constance has kept it hidden all these years, a trophy of her victory. I know this because she confessed it to me in a moment of brandy-fueled triumph 3 years ago, believing I would take the secret to my grave. I have left instructions with my solicitor, Mr. Theodore Brightwell of Lincoln's Inn. The original betrothal contract between the Hartwell and Cordell families still exists. By the terms negotiated by your father and the late Duke, the contract cannot be dissolved except by mutual agreement of both parties or the death of one. His Grace broke the engagement publicly, but he never formally dissolved the legal document. In the eyes of the law, you remain his promised bride. Use this knowledge as you will. Seek your vengeance or seek your peace. But know that you were innocent, that your suffering was unjust, and that those who wronged you must face their reckoning. With deepest affection and profound regret, Henrietta, Dowager Countess of Wexford. The pages slipped from Seraphina's fingers and drifted to the worn carpet like autumn leaves. She stood frozen, her mind struggling to process revelations that rewrote 2 decades of her existence. Innocent. She had been innocent all along. And Edmund Cordell, the Duke of Montfort, the man she had loved with the desperate intensity of youth, had abandoned her based on lies. The rage came first, hot and purifying, burning through years of resigned acceptance. Then came something colder, sharper, more focused. If the contract still existed, if she was still legally promised to the wealthiest duke in England, then perhaps it was time for the banished woman to reclaim what had been stolen from her. It was then that the knock came at the cottage door. Seraphina had so few visitors that the sound startled her from her whirling thoughts. She opened the door to find a distinguished gentleman in his middle years, his clothing marking him as London quality despite the mud of travel splattered on his boots. "Miss Hartwell?" he inquired, removing his hat with practiced courtesy. "I am Mr. Theodore Brightwell, solicitor to the late Dowager Countess. I have come regarding the reading of her will, which is to take place at Wexford Manor in 3 days' time. As beneficiary and witness, your presence is required by law." "Beneficiary?" Seraphina's voice emerged barely above a whisper. "The Dowager left me something in her will?" "Indeed, Miss Hartwell." Mr. Brightwell's expression remained professionally neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Though I am not at liberty to discuss the specific terms until the formal reading, I can tell you that several parties will be present, including members of the Wexford family and other interested individuals. The Dowager's instructions were quite explicit about who must attend." He handed her an official-looking document. "The reading is scheduled for 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon. A carriage will be sent for you at noon. I would advise you to prepare yourself, Miss Hartwell. The Dowager's final wishes are, shall we say, rather extraordinary." After he departed, Seraphina reread the letter with hands that no longer trembled. Pieces of a puzzle she had not known existed began to fall into place. The Dowager had been preparing something, some final act that would extend beyond death itself. And Seraphina, willing or not, was about to be thrust into the center of it. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and mounting anxiety. Seraphina possessed only 3 dresses suitable for any sort of formal occasion, all of them years out of fashion and carefully mended. She chose the least worn, a deep gray silk that had once been her mourning dress for her father. At 41, she had no illusions about her appearance. The years of hardship had carved lines around her eyes and mouth, had added silver threads to her dark hair, had taught her face to wear an expression of wary dignity that bore little resemblance to the radiant girl who had danced at Almack's 20 years ago. Yet as she studied herself in the cottage's clouded mirror on Friday morning, she saw something she had not noticed before. Strength. Survival. A kind of austere beauty that had nothing to do with youth's freshness and everything to do with endurance. The carriage that arrived at noon was far grander than she had expected, bearing the Wexford crest on its gleaming black door. The journey to Wexford Manor took less than an hour, but each mile felt like a step toward some irrevocable change. She watched the familiar Somerset countryside roll past and wondered if she would ever see it again, if the coming hours would transform her life as completely as that night at Almack's had done. Wexford Manor rose before her, its gray stone walls softened by climbing roses just beginning to bloom. Other carriages already occupied the circular drive, their crests announcing the presence of the Wexford heirs and other interested parties. Seraphina's stomach tightened as a liveried footman handed her down from the carriage with a respect she had not experienced in 20 years. The entrance hall took her breath away. She had visited the Dowager many times over the years, but always through the servant's entrance, always in her capacity as paid companion. To enter through the front door, to walk across marble floors as a guest rather than an employee, felt transgressive and thrilling in equal measure. The splendor felt less like a promise of home and more like a beautifully gilded cage, the true measure of the man's power over her fate. Mr. Brightwell appeared at her elbow, his expression kind. "This way, Miss Hartwell. The family is already assembled in the drawing room." She followed him through corridors lined with portraits of Wexford ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her progress with aristocratic disapproval. The drawing room doors stood open, revealing a space filled with elegantly dressed people who turned as one to stare at her entrance. The collective, silent dissection by the assembled guests was almost a physical weight in the air. Seraphina recognized several faces from her long-ago season. Lady Sophronia Wexford, the dowager's granddaughter, had aged into a harsh-featured woman whose disdain was immediately apparent. Lord Marcus Wexford, the current Earl, regarded her with barely concealed irritation at this interruption to what he clearly expected to be a simple distribution of his grandmother's assets. But it was the woman seated near the fireplace who captured Seraphina's attention and held it with the force of 20 years' worth of suppressed fury. Lady Constance Hartley, widowed now, if her black gown was any indication, had retained much of her youthful beauty. Her blonde hair showed only the faintest silver. Her figure remained enviably slender, and her face bore an expression of studied boredom that faltered only slightly when her eyes met Seraphina's across the room. "Good heavens!" Constance murmured to the woman beside her, her voice carrying with perfect calculation. "Is that Seraphina Hartwell?" I had heard she was still alive, but I confess I expected her to look more worn by hardship. Though I suppose 20 years of obscurity does leave its mark. The casual cruelty of it, the dismissive tone that reduced 2 decades of suffering to a mere inconvenience, ignited something dangerous in Seraphina's chest. But before she could respond, Mr. Brightwell cleared his throat. "If everyone would please be seated, we shall begin the reading of the will." Seraphina took the chair nearest the door, positioning herself for escape if needed. The solicitor settled behind a mahogany desk, withdrew a thick document from his leather case, and began to read in the formal tones required by law. The early bequests were predictable: modest sums to faithful servants, cherished pieces of jewelry to granddaughters, specific paintings to various relatives. Then Mr. Brightwell's voice took on a different quality, and Seraphina felt the atmosphere in the room shift. "To my dear companion of 20 years, Miss Seraphina Theodora Hartwell, who has served me with grace and dignity despite the cruel injustice done to her, I leave the following." He paused, glanced at Seraphina with something that might have been sympathy, and continued. "The cottage at Wexford, and the annual income from the trust fund established for that purpose, ensuring her independence and comfort for the remainder of her life. Additionally, I leave her the truth, documented in a sealed letter delivered separately, and my blessing to use that truth as she sees fit." A murmur rippled through the assembled relatives. Constance's expression had shifted from bored condescension to sharp attention. Lord Marcus looked apoplectic at the idea of estate funds being diverted to a mere companion. But Mr. Brightwell was not finished. Furthermore, the dowager has left specific instructions regarding another matter entirely. He withdrew a second document, this one yellowed with age. "In my possession at the time of my death is the original betrothal contract between Miss Seraphina Theodora Hartwell and Edmund Fitzwilliam Cordell, Duke of Montford, executed by their respective fathers in the year 1810 and binding by law until properly dissolved or fulfilled." The room exploded into chaos. Voices rose in shocked exclamation, and Constance had gone pale as milk. Seraphina sat frozen, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might be visible through her dress. "The contract," Mr. Brightwell continued, raising his voice to be heard, "was never formally dissolved despite the public rupture of the engagement in 1815. By the terms agreed upon, Miss Hartwell remains the legal promised bride of His Grace, entitled to all considerations and protections inherent in such a contract. The Dowager has requested that I notify His Grace of this fact and invite him to attend this reading should he wish to address the matter." "This is preposterous," Lord Marcus sputtered, rising to his feet. A contract from 25 years ago cannot possibly be considered valid after all this time. I assure you, my lord, it is entirely valid. Mr. Brightwell's tone remained implacably calm. The contract includes specific clauses regarding dissolution, none of which have been satisfied. His Grace's public renunciation of the engagement does not constitute legal dissolution of the contract itself. It was at that moment that a disturbance in the entrance hall announced the arrival of a late guest. Serafina heard the murmur of voices, the sound of boots on marble, and then the drawing room doors opened wider to admit a figure that made her breath catch in her throat. Edmund Fitzwilliam Cordell, Duke of Montfort, stood in the doorway like an incarnation of winter itself. At 39, he had grown from the handsome young man she remembered into something far more formidable. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his wealth and power with the ease of one born to both. His dark hair showed traces of silver at the temples. His face had acquired harsh lines of experience, and his gray eyes held the kind of coldness that had earned him the nickname the Winter Duke throughout the ton. Those eyes swept the room, paused on Constance with an expression Serafina could not read, and finally settled on her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and finally acknowledged for the first time in 20 years. "Your Grace," Mr. Brightwell said, bowing slightly. "How fortunate that you received my express message in time to attend." "I was in Bath on business," the Duke replied, his voice deeper and rougher than Serafina remembered. "Your letter indicated that matters of significant legal importance required my immediate attention. I confess I did not expect to find quite so large an audience for what I assumed would be a private consultation." He moved into the room with the unconscious grace of a predator, and Serafina noticed that the assembled company shrank slightly from his presence. The Duke of Montfort was not merely wealthy, he was proverbially so. His copper mines in Derbyshire had made him one of the richest men in England, and his refusal to remarry or even entertain courtship in the 8 years since his wife's death had made him an object of intense speculation and frustrated ambition throughout society. "Please be seated, Your Grace." Mr. Brightwell gestured to a chair. "I was just explaining to the assembled parties that the betrothal contract between yourself and Miss Hartwell, executed by your late father and her late father in 1810, remains legally binding." The Duke did not sit. Instead, he turned to face Serafina fully for the first time, and she forced herself to meet his gaze despite the racing of her heart. What did he see when he looked at her? The girl he had betrayed, now marked by time and hardship, or something else entirely? "Is this true?" His question was directed not to the solicitor, but to her, as though her answer mattered more than any legal document. He paused, his stare unnervingly steady. "And how do you intend to deploy this unexpected instrument, Miss Hartwell?" Serafina found her voice, surprised by its steadiness. "I was unaware of the contract's continued existence until 3 days ago, Your Grace. The Dowager left me a letter explaining many things that had been deliberately hidden from me." Something flickered in his expression, too quickly for her to identify. "I see." The question hung in the air between them, weighted with 2 decades of unspoken history. Every eye in the room fixed on Serafina, waiting for her answer. She felt Constance's hatred like a physical force, felt the Wexford relatives' curiosity and calculation, felt the Duke's regard like winter frost on her skin. What were her intentions? Revenge? Justice? Or simply the acknowledgement that she had been wronged? Before she could formulate a response, the Duke spoke again, and his words changed everything. "The contract remains valid," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "By the terms agreed upon by our fathers, Miss Hartwell is my promised bride. That contract has never been dissolved because I never formally petitioned for its dissolution. I was content to let it lie forgotten, a reminder of my own failure of character. But if the contract still exists, then so do its obligations." He turned to address the entire room, and Serafina saw something dangerous glinting in those winter-gray eyes. Miss Seraphina Hartwell is under my protection as of this moment. Any insult offered to her is an insult offered to the House of Montfort. Any harm done to her will be answered by me personally. Is that understood?" The pronouncement fell like a thunderclap. Lady Sophronia gasped audibly. Lord Marcus looked as though he had swallowed something poisonous. And Constance, Seraphina noted with grim satisfaction, had gone so pale that her carefully applied rouge stood out like paint on porcelain. "Your Grace," Constance managed, her voice high and strained. "Surely you cannot mean to honor a contract from so long ago, a contract connected to such unfortunate circumstances." "I assure you, my lady, I do not substitute one wrong for a different kind of obligation," the Duke replied, his gaze settling on Constance with the weight of an executioner's regard. "Lady Hartley, how extraordinary to find you here. I was not aware you had any particular connection to the late Dowager Countess, given the sacred nature of your bond. I confess I had thought you too occupied with society to attend the will reading of an elderly recluse." The words were polite, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. Constance recognized it too, her practiced smile faltering. "I came to pay my respects to my godmother's memory," she said, but the defensiveness in her tone undermined the piety of her words. "How touching," the Duke replied, and then he did something that sent a collective shock through the room. He crossed to where Seraphina sat, extended his hand to her, and said in a voice that brooked no refusal, "Miss Hartwell, if you would accompany me, we have much to discuss, and I believe this audience has grown tiresome." Seraphina stared at his outstretched hand as though it were a serpent. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to maintain the dignity of her isolation, to protect herself from the man who had destroyed her once before. However, Seraphina understood that the Duke's title and power were the ultimate weapons for her specific brand of justice. Acceptance was a calculated move to seize power. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness, and he drew her to her feet with the same courtly grace he must have displayed at 1,000 balls and assemblies in the years since he had cast her aside. "Mr. Brightwell," the Duke said without taking his eyes from Seraphina's face, "I trust you can send the relevant documents to my solicitor in London. Miss Hartwell and I have 20 years of conversation to compress into a single afternoon." He led her from the drawing room, through the astonished gazes of the assembled company, past servants who pressed themselves against walls to make way, and out into the manor's gardens where late afternoon sun turned the roses to flame. Only when they were alone, surrounded by the scent of spring flowers and the distant sound of birdsong, did he release her hand. Seraphina stepped back immediately, putting physical distance between them, and wrapped her arms around herself as though she could contain the storm of emotions threatening to break free. "Why?" The word emerged harsh and raw, stripped of the careful politeness she had cultivated over 20 years. "Why did you believe them? Why did you not defend me?" The Duke stood silent for a long moment, his profile sharp against the evening light. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of carried guilt. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. 20 years old, newly invested with a dukedom I did not feel prepared to manage, surrounded by advisors who counseled caution and propriety above all else. When the accusation came, when Lady Sefton herself declared you had been caught with the necklace, I believed the evidence of my eyes rather than the truth of my heart. He turned to face her fully, and she saw something in his expression that might have been anguish. "I saw the necklace in your reticule with my own eyes, Seraphina. Or at least, I believed I did. The crowd, the accusations, the chaos of that moment, I allowed myself to be convinced by circumstance rather than trusting what I knew of your character. And for that cowardice, that failure of faith, I have paid a price I suspect you cannot imagine." "Cannot imagine?" Seraphina's laugh emerged like broken glass, sharp and destructive. "You paid a price? You, who went on to marry, to take your place in society, to build your fortune and your reputation while I rotted in obscurity as a paid companion? Tell me, Your Grace, what price did you pay that compares to 20 years of exile? I married a woman I did not love because I could not bear to remain unmarried when you had been so thoroughly ruined, he said, and the rawness in his voice stopped her building fury. I married Lucinda Fairfax within a year of your banishment, and I made her profoundly unhappy every day of our 7-year marriage. She died giving birth to a stillborn son, died knowing that her husband had given her everything except the one thing she desperately wanted, his heart. That is my price, Serafina. I destroyed 2 lives that night at Almack's, yours and hers, and I have lived with that knowledge every day since. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Serafina found her anger faltering, not because his suffering absolved him, but because it complicated the narrative of simple villainy she had constructed over the years. The dowager's letter, she said carefully, claims that Constance planted the necklace in my reticule, that she orchestrated my destruction out of jealousy because she loved you and could not bear our betrothal. I have suspected as much for years, the Duke replied. I investigated privately after my wife's death, when I finally had the strength of mind to examine the past I had tried so desperately to forget. I found evidence that the necklace was never truly recovered, that Constance's marriage to Viscount Hartley occurred with suspicious speed, that her financial situation improved mysteriously around the same time. But I had no proof, nothing that would convince society to reverse its judgment against you. He moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the signs that time had marked him as thoroughly as it had marked her. When Mr. Brightwell's letter arrived, when I learned that the contract still existed and that you had been living all these years not 2 hours' ride from my estate in Derbyshire, I knew that the universe was offering me an opportunity I did not deserve, a chance to make amends, however inadequate, for the harm I caused you. Amends, Serafina repeated, testing the word. What form do these amends take, Your Grace? A belated apology? A charitable pension? Perhaps a quiet retirement in one of your lesser properties where I can live out my remaining years in comfortable obscurity? I was thinking of something rather more public, he said, and something in his tone made her pulse quicken. The contract between our fathers specified a marriage. The terms included a substantial marriage settlement, a jointure that would make you independently wealthy, even if I died the day after the wedding, and specific provisions for any children born of our union. All of this remains legally binding. Serafina's mouth went dry. You cannot seriously be suggesting that we honor a contract written 25 years ago. A contract connected to a betrothal that ended in public scandal and mutual destruction. Can I not? He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. You are 41 years old, banished from society, living on the charity of the dead. I am 39, wealthy beyond measure, and so isolated by my own actions that I have not attended a London season in 5 years. What do either of us have to lose by honoring the promises made by our fathers? My dignity, she shot back, my self-respect, the knowledge that I did not have to beg for scraps from the man who destroyed me. I am not asking you to beg, he said quietly. I am asking you to let me fulfill an obligation I should never have broken. I am asking you to allow me to restore your reputation, to give you back the life that was stolen from you, to see justice done, even if it comes 2 decades too late. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice held a note of something that might have been pleading. I am asking you to marry me, Serafina, not because I deserve your forgiveness, but because you deserve vindication. Let me give you that at least. Let me stand before all of London and declare that you were innocent, that I was wrong, that the woman I cast aside was worth more than every diamond in the crown jewels. The proposal, if it could be called that, was so unexpected, so baldly transactional, yet somehow genuine, that Serafina found herself without words. She stared at him, this man who had haunted her dreams and nightmares for 20 years, and tried to see past the Duke to the boy he had been, the boy she had loved with the unquestioning faith of youth. "Why now?" she finally managed. "Why, after all this time, do you suddenly care about justice for me?" "Because I am tired," he said, and the simple honesty of it struck her like a blow. "Tired of living with guilt, tired of seeing your face in every woman I pass, tired of wondering what my life might have been if I had possessed the courage to trust you that night. And because the Dowager Countess, in her infinite meddling wisdom, has given us both an opportunity to rewrite our endings." He extended his hand again, not in command this time, but in invitation. "I cannot undo the past, Serafina. I cannot give you back the 20 years you lost, cannot erase the pain I caused, cannot make you young again any more than I can restore my own wasted years. But I can give you the future you were promised, a position in society higher than any you could have achieved on your own. Wealth that would make you independent of any man's whim, including mine, and the satisfaction of watching Constance and every other person who wronged you forced to acknowledge their mistake." Serafina looked at his hand, at the offer it represented, at the temptation of vindication warring with the wisdom of self-preservation in her heart. Could she really bind herself to this man, this Duke who had betrayed her once and might betray her again? Could she walk back into the society that had cast her out, face the whispers and the stares, endure the inevitable humiliations that would come with such a public reversal of fortune? But then she thought of Constance's smug face in the drawing room, thought of 20 years of exile and loneliness, and wondering if she would die as forgotten as she had lived, and felt something harden in her chest. Perhaps vindication was worth the risk. Perhaps justice, even incomplete, was better than continued obscurity. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have conditions." Interest flickered in his eyes. "Name them." "First, this is an arrangement of convenience, not a love match. I will not pretend to forgive you, and you will not insult me by pretending this is anything other than an attempt to salvage your own conscience." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "Second, I want Constance exposed, not just socially embarrassed but completely ruined. I want her to face the same exile I faced, to know what it means to be cast out and forgotten." Something that might have been approval crossed his face. "I believe that can be arranged. I have resources at my disposal that make such things quite achievable. Third," and here her voice hardened, "I want my own household, my own income, my own life. I will be your Duchess in name and in public, but I will not be your possession. I have lived under the control of others for too long to surrender my freedom now." He studied her for a long moment, and she saw him truly calculating, weighing her demands against his own needs. Finally, he nodded. "Acceptable, with one caveat. We must appear to be a united front in public. The tongue is vicious to any hint of discord, and if we are to accomplish your second condition, we need to present an image of absolute solidarity." "Agreed," Serafina said, and felt as though she were signing away something precious and irretrievable. "When would this marriage take place?" "As soon as possible," he replied. "The longer we delay, the more time society has to craft narratives that undermine our purpose. I propose we obtain a special license and marry within the fortnight. Then we proceed to London for the season, arriving just as the major events begin. Our appearance together will create the scandal we need to facilitate Constance's downfall." He offered his hand once more, and this time Serafina took it, sealing a bargain that felt less like a marriage proposal and more like a declaration of war. His grip was firm, warm, and for just a moment she allowed herself to remember what it had felt like to hold this hand without anger or calculation, to believe that the man attached to it would protect rather than betray her. But that girl was long dead, and the woman who had taken her place knew better than to mistake transaction for tenderness. The Duke smiled, a sharp expression that held no warmth but considerable satisfaction. "Then we are agreed. I shall begin the necessary arrangements immediately. You may remain at Wexford Cottage until the wedding, or if you prefer, I can have a suite prepared for you at Montford Hall. Given the scandal we are about to create, it might be wise to establish your presence in my household as quickly as possible. I will remain at the cottage, Serafina said firmly. I have no desire to experience charity disguised as hospitality, and I suspect we will have more than enough forced proximity once this marriage is accomplished. As you wish. He inclined his head, accepting her decision with a grace that surprised her. I will call upon you in 3 days with the marriage contract for your review. I assume you wish to examine the financial terms before committing yourself? I would be a fool not to, she replied, and saw the corner of his mouth twitch in what might have been amusement. Indeed you would. I find I am relieved to discover that 20 years of hardship have not made you any less sharp than you were at 21. I suspect I shall need all your considerable intelligence if we are to carry off this charade successfully. The word charade stung more than it should have, a reminder that whatever they were building together was a performance rather than a partnership. But Serafina had learned long ago to accept uncomfortable truths, and she simply nodded. 3 days then, Your Grace. I shall expect your call. She turned to leave, to return to the cottage and the solitude that had been her only reliable companion for so long, but his voice stopped her. Serafina. The use of her given name, spoken in that deep voice without title or formality, made something twist in her chest. For what it is worth, I am sorry. More sorry than I have words to express. I know my apology changes nothing, erases nothing, but I wanted you to hear it nonetheless. She looked back at him, this duke who held her future in his powerful hands, and saw in his face something that might have been genuine regret. Whether it was enough to build anything lasting upon, she could not say. But it was, perhaps, a beginning. Apologies are words, Your Grace, she said quietly. I will judge you by your actions, not your eloquence. Prove your remorse through deeds, and perhaps in time I might find it possible to move beyond hatred. I ask for nothing more, he replied, and bowed to her with the same perfect courtesy he might have shown a queen. Serafina left him standing in the garden surrounded by roses, a figure of wealth and power and profound isolation, and wondered if she had just made the wisest decision of her life or the most catastrophic mistake since the night she had trusted him with her heart and been destroyed for that trust. Only time would reveal which. The next 3 days passed in a blur of surreal activity. True to his word, the Duke called at the cottage precisely 72 hours after their conversation in the garden, arriving in a magnificent barouche accompanied by his solicitor and carrying a sheaf of documents that would have intimidated a less determined woman. Serafina received them in the cottage's modest sitting room, acutely aware of the contrast between the Duke's obvious wealth and her borrowed poverty. But if he noticed the worn furnishings and faded curtains, he gave no sign, instead settling into the least rickety chair with the same ease he might have displayed in a palace. Miss Hartwell, he began formally, I have brought the marriage contract for your review. My solicitor, Mr. Jameson Blackwell, will explain the terms in detail, but I wish you to understand the essential points before we proceed. Mr. Blackwell was a thin, austere man who regarded Serafina with the professional neutrality of someone who had seen every variety of fortune hunter and gold digger. He spread the documents across the small table with methodical precision. The contract provides for a marriage settlement of £30,000 paid directly to you upon the wedding, he began, his voice dry as old paper. Additionally, you will receive an annual pin money of £2,000 for your personal expenses, a jointure of £5,000 per annum should you be widowed, and full control over any properties gifted to you by His Grace during the marriage. Serafina's breath caught. £30,000 was a staggering sum, enough to make her independently wealthy regardless of what happened in the marriage. £2,000 annually would allow her to live as a gentlewoman of means even without the Duke's support. It was far more generous than the original contract negotiated by their fathers, which she dimly remembered had included a settlement of perhaps £10,000. "That seems excessive," she said carefully, watching the Duke's face for any sign of mockery or trap. "On the contrary," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "It is barely adequate compensation for 20 years of lost income and opportunity. Had we married as planned when you were 21, you would have had access to far greater wealth over the intervening decades. This is merely an attempt to restore what should have been yours by right." His logic was sound, but the generosity still felt dangerous, a gilded chain rather than freedom. "And what do you receive in exchange for this extraordinary settlement, Your Grace?" "A duchess," he said simply. "An end to the marriage proposals and machinations that have plagued me since my wife's death. The satisfaction of seeing justice done, however belatedly. And perhaps, if I am fortunate, the possibility of finding some measure of peace in the years remaining to us." The last admission, spoken so quietly she almost missed it, contained more vulnerability than she had expected from the cold Duke of Montfort. She studied him, trying to reconcile the ruthless aristocrat with the man who seemed genuinely haunted by past failures. "I will sign," she said finally, and watched something that might have been relief flicker across his features. The actual signing took less than an hour, witnessed by Mr. Blackwell and Mrs. Martha Holloway, the cottage's elderly housekeeper who had served the dowager for decades. When the final signature was affixed, when the contracts were folded and sealed and distributed to the appropriate parties, Serafina felt as though she had crossed some invisible threshold into a future both terrifying and thrilling. "The wedding will take place in 5 days," the Duke informed her as they concluded their business. "I have secured a special license and arranged for the ceremony to be performed in the chapel at Montfort Hall. Given the unusual circumstances, I thought privacy would be preferable to a public spectacle." "Agreed," Serafina said, grateful for small mercies. The thought of marrying him before a crowd of curious onlookers made her stomach churn. "After the wedding, we will depart immediately for London. The season is well underway, and our arrival will create precisely the sensation we need. I have taken the liberty of arranging for a modiste to call upon you here at the cottage. You will need an entirely new wardrobe appropriate to your new station." The reminder of her poverty, however kindly delivered, stung. But Serafina forced herself to nod acceptance. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford if she wanted to achieve her goals. "One more thing," the Duke said as he prepared to depart. "I have made inquiries into Constance's current circumstances. She is heavily in debt following her husband's death, dependent on the charity of her late husband's nephew, and desperately seeking a wealthy second marriage to restore her fortunes. She has been angling for an introduction to me for the past 3 years, a fact that will make our ultimate revenge that much sweeter." The cold calculation in his voice, the clear evidence that he had been planning this as thoroughly as any military campaign, should have alarmed her. Instead, Serafina felt a fierce surge of satisfaction. If she must marry for vengeance rather than love, at least she had chosen an ally who understood the value of thorough preparation. The 5 days until the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity that left Serafina breathless and disoriented. The promised modiste arrived with trunks full of fabrics and fashion plates, measuring and pinning and clucking disapprovingly at Serafina's threadbare undergarments. Within 2 days, a wardrobe suitable for a duchess began to take shape, including a wedding gown of ivory silk that made Serafina's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had never expected to marry, had long since abandoned the dreams of white gowns and orange blossoms that had sustained her girlhood. To stand now in front of a mirror wearing bridal silk at 41 felt like a mockery of those lost hopes, a reminder of everything the years had stolen from her. But when she looked at her reflection, she saw not a desperate spinster playing at youth, but a woman who had survived 2 decades of hardship and emerged with her dignity intact. The ivory silk complemented her mature beauty rather than fighting against it, and the simple elegance of the design suited her far better than the fussy confections she had worn at 21. Perhaps, she thought, there was something to be said for second chances, even when they came wrapped in calculation rather than romance. The wedding day arrived with the soft warmth of late spring, the Derbyshire countryside dressed in wild flowers and fresh green. A carriage arrived at noon to convey Serafina to Montford Hall, and she made the journey in solitude, grateful for the time to prepare herself mentally for what was to come. Montford Hall rose before her like something from a dream, all golden stone and mullioned windows, surrounded by parkland that seemed to stretch to the horizon. This would be her home now, this palace that made Wexford Manor look like a cottage. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, a physical manifestation of the Duke's wealth and power and the enormous gulf between their respective positions. The Duke met her at the entrance, dressed in formal black with a silver waistcoat that made his gray eyes even more striking. He bowed over her hand with perfect courtesy, but Serafina noticed that his grip was not quite steady, that something in his face suggested he was as anxious as she about the step they were about to take. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, and the unexpected compliment made her flush. "You look respectable," she replied, and saw his mouth quirk in what might have been amusement. The ceremony itself was brief and formal, conducted by the Duke's chaplain in a chapel that smelled of beeswax and old stone. There were no guests beyond the necessary witnesses. Mr. Blackwell, Mrs. Holloway, and the Duke's elderly butler, who stood throughout with an expression of profound disapproval barely concealed. Serafina spoke her vows in a voice that surprised her with its steadiness, promising to honor and obey a man she had every reason to hate. The Duke's vows were delivered with equal composure, his deep voice filling the small chapel as he promised to worship her with his body and endow her with all his worldly goods. When the chaplain pronounced them man and wife, when the Duke leaned forward to press a chaste kiss to her cheek, as custom demanded, Serafina felt something shift inside her chest. This was real now. She was the Duchess of Montford, bound by law and church to the man who had destroyed her, and there would be no going back from this moment. The wedding breakfast was a subdued affair, just the two of them at opposite ends of a table designed to seat 20. They made stilted conversation about the journey to London, about the social calendar, about everything except the enormous step they had just taken. Serafina found herself studying him across the expanse of white linen and fine china, noticing details she had been too angry to observe before. The way his fingers drummed restlessly against his wine glass, the tension in his shoulders that suggested he was not as composed as he appeared, the occasional glances he directed at her that held something that might have been longing. "We should depart within the hour," he said finally, setting down his fork with barely touched food still on his plate. "I have arranged for us to stay at my townhouse in Grosvenor Square. Our formal entry into society will be tomorrow evening at Lady Arabella Stratton's ball, which has the advantage of being one of the most well-attended events of the season." "And Constance?" Serafina asked, proud of how little emotion colored her voice. "Will she be there?" "Oh yes," the Duke replied, and his smile was sharp as a blade. "Lady Hartley has been angling for an invitation to Lady Arabella's events for years. She will be there, and she will have no warning of what awaits her." The journey to London took the better part of 2 days, made comfortable by the Duke's magnificently appointed traveling chaise and regular changes of horse at the most reputable posting houses, ensuring their progress was swift and their private accommodations maintained. They maintained separate rooms at each stop, a courtesy Serafina appreciated, even as she wondered if it would become their permanent arrangement. The marriage contract had made no specific mention of the traditional expectation of heirs, and neither of them had been brave enough to raise the subject during the hasty negotiations. London in May was everything Serafina remembered, and nothing like it. The streets were crowded with carriages, the air thick with coal smoke, and the complex perfume of thousands of humans living in close quarters. They approached the city from the north, passing through progressively more elegant neighborhoods until the coach turned onto Grosvenor Square and stopped before a townhouse that made her breath catch. The Duke's London residence was a masterpiece of Georgian architecture, all honey-colored stone and perfectly proportioned windows. Servants lined the entrance steps, a small army of livery-clad individuals who bowed and curtsied as Serafina descended from the carriage on her new husband's arm. "Your Grace," the butler intoned, a different man from the disapproving one at Montfort Hall. This servant was younger, sharp-eyed, and greeted her with a respect that felt genuine rather than forced. "Welcome to Montfort House. We are honored to receive you." The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, all marble and gilt, and paintings by masters whose names Serafina recognized from her art studies in her youth. The Duke guided her through rooms designed for entertaining on a grand scale, explaining the layout with the calm detachment of a museum guide. "Your private apartments are on the second floor," he said, leading her up a sweeping staircase. "I commissioned the apartments to be completely refurbished, a sanctuary prepared for your arrival. But if the style does not suit you, you need only say so, and we will change everything." He opened a set of double doors to reveal a suite of rooms that took Serafina's breath away. The sitting room was decorated in shades of blue and silver, elegant without being fussy, with windows overlooking the square's private garden. Beyond it lay a bedroom with a canopied bed large enough to sleep four, a dressing room lined with wardrobes already filled with the gowns commissioned from the modiste, and a private study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "My apartments are through that door," the Duke said, indicating a connecting door that was currently closed. "I will not intrude without invitation, but I thought it important that we maintain the appearance of a conventional marriage for the servants' benefit. Household staff are notorious gossips, and we cannot afford rumors of a marriage in name only if we are to maintain credibility in society." The practicality of his reasoning was sound, but the proximity still made Serafina's pulse quicken. "I understand," she managed. "And where shall we sleep tonight?" He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "That is entirely your decision, Serafina. I meant what I said about not forcing my presence upon you. If you wish for me to maintain separate quarters, I will do so. If you wish to observe the forms of a conventional marriage for appearance's sake, I am willing. And if you wish something in between, we can negotiate terms as we have negotiated everything else." The frank acknowledgement of the awkwardness, the refusal to prettify or romanticize their situation, was oddly comforting. "For tonight," she said carefully, "I would prefer solitude. I need time to adjust to this new reality before I can contemplate the additional complexities of physical intimacy." Relief flickered across his face, so quick she almost missed it. "As you wish. I will have dinner sent up to your rooms. Tomorrow will be a demanding day, and you should rest as much as possible before we face society." He bowed formally and withdrew, leaving Serafina alone in her magnificent new prison. She sank onto a velvet settee and let herself tremble with the reaction she had been suppressing for hours. She was married. She was a duchess. She was about to walk back into the society that had destroyed her, not as a supplicant, but as one of its most powerful members. And tomorrow, she would see Constance again, and the long-delayed reckoning would finally begin. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams of the past and anxiety about the future. Serafina woke before dawn and lay in the enormous bed, watching light creep across the ceiling, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But when her new lady's maid arrived with chocolate and news that the Duke wished to breakfast with her to discuss strategy for the evening, she forced herself out of bed and into the role she had chosen to play. The Duke was already seated at the breakfast table when she arrived, newspapers spread around him in the disciplined chaos of a man who kept close watch on the world. He rose at her entrance, pulling out her chair with his own hands before the footman could intervene. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, the conventional question made almost tender by genuine concern in his tone. "Well enough," she lied, and saw from his expression that he did not believe her but would not press the issue. They ate in surprisingly companionable silence for several minutes before he set aside his newspaper and fixed her with his full attention. "Lady Arabella's ball will be our baptism by fire," he said without preamble. "The Tun will be watching our every move, listening to our every word, constructing narratives about our sudden marriage from the smallest gestures. We must present absolute unity, complete confidence, and not a hint of the complicated history between us." "What story shall we tell?" Serafina asked, sipping her chocolate and finding it perfectly prepared despite her never having told anyone her preferences. Someone had done their research. "The truth, edited for palatability," he replied. "We were betrothed as children. Circumstances forced us apart. The recent death of the Dowager Countess brought us back into each other's lives, and we discovered that the feelings we once had were not as dead as we believed. We married quickly because at our age we have no need for long courtships or elaborate weddings. We are in love, deliriously so, and society can think what it likes about our choice." The word love sounded strange in his mouth when applied to them, but Serafina could see the strategy behind it. A love match would be romantic rather than suspicious, would explain their hasty marriage and provide a narrative that society could embrace. "And when they ask about my 20-year absence," she prompted, "you were caring for elderly relatives in the country, away from society by choice rather than exile. You preferred quiet countryside life to London's exhausting whirl. But love, as they say, changes everything, and you could not resist returning when I pressed my suit with such determination." It was a clever lie, one that painted her absence as voluntary rather than forced. "What about Constance?" His expression hardened. "Leave Constance to me. I have been gathering information about her activities for the past 5 days, and what I have learned will prove most useful when the time comes to strike. For now, we will be gracious, even generous. We will greet her as an old family friend, give her no reason to suspect that we know her secret. And then, when she is most comfortable, most confident that she has escaped consequences for her actions, we will destroy her." The cold calculation in his voice should have disturbed her. Instead, Serafina felt a savage satisfaction that she had allied herself with someone who understood the value of strategic patience. Lady Arabella Stratton's ball that evening was everything Serafina remembered about London society, amplified by 2 decades of absence. The ballroom blazed with the light of 1,000 candles. Music soared from an orchestra hidden behind potted palms, and the cream of the Tun paraded in silks and jewels that represented more wealth than most people saw in lifetimes. Serafina descended from the Duke's carriage on his arm, wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that the modiste had promised would make her look like royalty. Her dark hair was dressed in an elegant style appropriate to her age and station. Diamonds borrowed from the Montfort collection glittered at her throat and ears, and she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had survived worse trials than a room full of judgmental aristocrats. The announcement of their arrival created exactly the sensation the Duke had predicted. Conversation faltered, heads turned, and a pathway opened before them like the parting of waters. Serafina felt hundreds of eyes upon her, assessing, judging, trying to reconcile the scandalous exile of 20 years ago with the elegant Duchess on the Duke of Montfort's arm. Lady Arabella greeted them with the shrieking enthusiasm of someone who recognized a social coup when she saw one. "Your Grace, how wonderful that you have finally deigned to attend one of my little gatherings, and this must be your bride. My dear Duchess, you are very welcome. We are quite starved for new faces this season, and I confess I am dying to hear how you managed to capture our most elusive bachelor." "The capture was entirely mutual," the Duke replied smoothly, raising Serafina's gloved hand to his lips in a gesture that made several nearby ladies sigh audibly. "I am the fortunate one, to have finally convinced her that London life was worth enduring for the sake of our happiness." It was a performance worthy of Drury Lane, and Serafina played her part with an ease that surprised her. She smiled, she charmed, she answered questions with just enough detail to satisfy curiosity while maintaining mystery. she danced the first waltz with her new husband, finding to her surprise that their bodies remembered how to move together despite the decades that had passed since they last danced at Almack's. "You are doing wonderfully," he murmured as they swept across the floor, his hand warm against her waist. "Half the room is already in love with you, and the other half is too consumed by envy to formulate an insult." "And where is Constance?" she asked quietly, scanning the crowd while maintaining her smile. "Far corner, near the refreshment room, wearing puce and fury in equal measure." Serafina's gaze found her cousin across the crowded ballroom, and for a moment their eyes met. The hatred in Constance's expression was unmistakable, a pure distillation of venom that transcended 2 decades of separation. But there was something else there too, something that might have been fear. Constance approached them after the waltz, her smile fixed and brittle as old porcelain. She was accompanied by an elderly gentleman whom she introduced as Sir Horace Pembley, her late husband's uncle and current patron. "Your Graces," she said, her voice honey-sweet with underlying poison. "How delightful to see you both. I confess I was quite astonished to learn of your marriage. Such a whirlwind courtship, and after so many years. One might almost think there was some urgency to the union." The implication was clear. She was suggesting an improper pregnancy, a scandal that would taint their marriage from the start. Serafina felt the Duke tense beside her, but before he could respond, she laid a gentle hand on his arm and smiled at Constance with perfect serenity. "Indeed, cousin, there was great urgency," she said sweetly. "When one finds one's soulmate, waiting seems not only unnecessary, but actively foolish. My husband and I wasted enough years apart. We saw no reason to waste any more." The word cousin dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, a deliberate reminder of their family connection, and by extension, of the scandal that had separated them. Constance's smile faltered for just an instant before she recovered. "How charming," she managed. "Though I confess, I had thought you lost to us entirely, dear Serafina. It has been such a long time since we last spoke. Tell me, what have you been doing with yourself all these years?" "Caring for the Dowager Countess of Wexford," Serafina replied, watching Constance's face carefully. "My godmother," the Duke added casually, "and a woman of great insight and wisdom. Her death last month was a profound loss to us both." The color drained from Constance's face as the implication registered. The Dowager had been her godmother too, and if the Dowager had left information about that long-ago night at Almack's, if she had confessed her witnessing of the truth, then Constance's carefully constructed lies were about to collapse around her. "How sad," Constance managed, her voice strained. "I had not heard of her passing. We had rather lost touch over the years." "Yes," the Duke said, his tone carrying a subtle edge that only the 3 of them could hear. "She mentioned that she had been disappointed by certain godchildren who failed to visit her in her final years. But she was scrupulous about her correspondence, even in her illness. So many letters, so many confessions she wished to make before facing her final judgment." Constance made some excuse and withdrew, her earlier confidence visibly shaken. Serafina watched her go and felt the first stirrings of the satisfaction she had craved for 20 years. This was only the beginning, but it was a good beginning. The rest of the ball passed in a blur of introductions and carefully diplomatic conversations. The ton might have been vicious, but they were also pragmatic, and no one wanted to risk offending the Duke of Montfort by snubbing his new Duchess. By the time the Duke handed Serafina back into their carriage at 2 in the morning, she was exhausted but triumphant. "You were magnificent," he said, as the carriage rolled through the darkened streets toward Grosvenor Square. "I have never seen someone dismantle an enemy with such grace and subtlety." Constance looked positively ill by the end of the evening. "Good," Serafina replied, and meant it. "But this is only the first strike. We need to press our advantage before she has time to recover or flee." "Agreed. I have already begun disseminating certain information about her financial difficulties. By tomorrow afternoon, half of London will know that she is deeply in debt and desperately seeking a wealthy husband to save her from ruin. It makes her look mercenary, which will undermine any sympathy she might otherwise receive. The calculated cruelty of it should have disturbed her. Instead, Serafina felt a savage satisfaction that she had allied herself with someone who understood the value of strategic patience. "What else have you learned?" "That she still has the Valancourt necklace," he said grimly. "My investigators tracked it to a private bank vault in her name. She has been keeping it as insurance, perhaps, or simply as a trophy. Either way, its existence proves that the necklace was never actually stolen from Lady Valancourt, which raises some very interesting questions about what really happened that night at Almack's." Serafina's heart raced. "Can we retrieve it? Use it as evidence?" "Not legally, not without revealing our hand too soon. But I have other plans for that necklace, plans that will require patience and perfect timing. Trust me, Serafina. We will have our vengeance, and it will be absolute." The use of her given name again, the way he spoke of "we" and "our," as though they were truly partners in this endeavor, created a warmth in her chest that she tried very hard to ignore. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She could not afford to let herself believe otherwise. But as the Duke helped her from the carriage, as his hand lingered perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary on hers, as his eyes held hers in the lamplight outside Montfort House, Serafina found herself wondering if the lines between vengeance and something deeper might be more blurred than she had anticipated. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of social engagements carefully orchestrated to maximize their impact on society and on Constance's rapidly deteriorating position. The Duke and Serafina attended every major event, presenting a united front of apparent marital bliss that had the ton sighing over their romantic devotion. In private, their relationship remained cordial but distant, two conspirators united by common purpose rather than affection. They took breakfast together each morning to plan strategy, attended events together each evening, and maintained separate bedrooms with a formality that made no sense given their supposed love match, but which neither of them questioned. It was after their third week in London, after a particularly successful evening at Almack's, where they had been received with acclaim by the very patronesses who had cast Serafina out 20 years earlier, that the Duke knocked on the connecting door between their apartments. Serafina, already dressed for bed in a modest nightgown and wrapper, hesitated before calling out permission to enter. He appeared in the doorway, still in his evening clothes, though he had removed his jacket and cravat, looking oddly vulnerable without the formal armor of full dress. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said, hovering at the threshold as though unsure of his welcome. "Not at all," she replied, gesturing to the seating area near the fireplace. "I was merely reading. Did something happen at the assembly that we need to discuss?" He settled into the chair across from her, his long legs stretched toward the fire. "No, nothing like that. Our performance tonight was flawless as always. Lady Sefton herself complimented me on my choice of bride, which I found darkly amusing considering she was one of the patronesses who destroyed you." "The irony was not lost on me," Serafina agreed. "Though I confess I take some satisfaction in having her approval now, even if it comes 2 decades too late." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant noise of carriages in the square below. When the Duke spoke again, his voice held an unusual hesitancy. "I wanted to ask you something, and I hope you will answer honestly, even if the answer is difficult." Serafina set aside her book, giving him her full attention. "Ask. Do you regret this?" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the apartments, the marriage, the entire complicated arrangement they had constructed. "The bargain we made, the revenge we are pursuing, is it giving you what you hoped for, or have I simply added a new form of suffering to the burden you already carry?" The question surprised her with its genuine concern. She considered it carefully, trying to be honest with both of them. "I do not regret it," she said finally. "Is it complicated?" "Yes. Is it sometimes painful to be constantly on display, constantly performing? Absolutely. But it is also liberating in ways I did not anticipate. For 20 years I was invisible, dismissed, forgotten. Now I am seen. Now I matter. That has value, even if it comes packaged with difficulty. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the fire. I am glad to hear that. I confess, I have been worried that I had merely substituted one wrong for a different kind of obligation. That I had made you a duchess, but left you no more free than you were as a companion. We are neither of us free, Serafina observed. You are as trapped by this performance as I am, perhaps more so because you carry the added weight of guilt. But trapped together is preferable to being trapped alone, and there is something to be said for having an ally in one's imprisonment. He looked at her then, really looked at her in a way he had not since that first day in the Wexford Manor garden, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. It was not quite desire, not quite affection, but something complicated that encompassed both and more. When I look at you now, he said quietly, I see both the girl I failed 20 years ago and the woman who has survived what I did to her. And I find myself wondering if perhaps we might build something real from this architecture of revenge and restitution. If perhaps there might be room for genuine partnership beneath all the performance and strategy. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous territory, the kind that could undermine all her careful defenses. We agreed this was an arrangement of convenience, she reminded him, though her voice lacked conviction. A transaction, not a romance. We did, he acknowledged. But arrangements can evolve, can they not? Transactions can become something more substantial if both parties are willing. Before she could formulate a response, before she could decide whether she wanted to encourage or discourage this shift in their relationship, a loud knocking at the front door echoed through the house. Moments later, urgent footsteps sounded in the corridor, and the butler appeared at the sitting room door, looking uncharacteristically flustered. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but a message has arrived from Bow Street. It seems there has been an incident involving Lady Constance Hartley. The magistrate requests your immediate attendance. The Duke was on his feet instantly. All trace of vulnerability vanished behind ducal authority. What kind of incident? The messenger was not specific, Your Grace, but he implied it was a matter of some urgency and potentially criminal in nature. Serafina rose as well, her mind racing. This could be the break they had been waiting for, or it could be a trap designed to embarrass them. Should I accompany you? The Duke considered for a moment, then nodded. Yes, if this concerns Constance, it concerns us both. And if it is indeed the culmination we have been working toward, I want you there to witness her fall. They dressed quickly, dispensing with formal evening wear in favor of more practical clothing, suitable for venturing into less fashionable parts of London. The Duke's town coach carried them through darkening streets to the Bow Street magistrate's office, where they were immediately shown into a private room. What they found there exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. Constance sat in a hard wooden chair, her fashionable gown torn and muddy, her carefully arranged hair disheveled, and her face bearing the unmistakable marks of tears. Across from her sat the chief magistrate, Sir Nathaniel Worthing, a stern man known for his incorruptibility and his distaste for aristocratic scandal. Your Grace, Sir Nathaniel rose and bowed to the Duke. Thank you for coming so promptly. I apologize for the late hour, but this matter requires your immediate attention given your family connection to Lady Hartley. What has happened? The Duke asked, though Serafina could see from his carefully controlled expression that he had already guessed. Lady Hartley was apprehended this evening, attempting to sell a diamond necklace to a jeweler in Cheapside. The jeweler, being suspicious of a lady of quality selling such a valuable piece in such a questionable neighborhood, sent word to Bow Street. Upon investigation, we discovered that the necklace matches the description of the Valancourt piece that went missing 20 years ago during a scandal at Almack's assembly rooms. The room seemed to tilt around Serafina. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for, the proof that would vindicate her and destroy Constance. But she had not expected it to come so suddenly, so completely. "That is impossible," Constance protested, her voice shrill with desperation. "I have had that necklace in my possession for years. It was a gift from my late husband." "Interesting," Sir Nathaniel replied dryly. "Because Lord Valancourt, who is still very much alive and who was Lady Valancourt's heir after her death 10 years ago, has just confirmed that the necklace I showed him is indeed the piece his mother wore to Almack's on the night of April 15th, 1815, the night that Miss Serafina Hartwell, now the Duchess of Montfort, was publicly accused of stealing it." Constance's face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. Her eyes found Serafina across the room, and the hatred in them was so pure, so distilled, that it was almost beautiful in its intensity. "You did this," she hissed. "You orchestrated this whole thing. You and your bought husband with his investigators and his schemes. None of this is real." "On the contrary," the Duke said, his voice cold as a winter grave. "This is the most real thing that has happened in 20 years. You stole that necklace, Constance. You planted it on Serafina to destroy her because you were jealous of our betrothal. And then you kept it like a trophy, like a token of your triumph, never thinking that your own greed and desperation would one day expose your crime." He moved to stand beside Serafina, and she felt him take her hand in his, a gesture of solidarity that felt genuine rather than performative for the first time since their marriage. "You destroyed an innocent woman's life out of jealousy and malice. You cost her 20 years of happiness, of society, of the future she should have had. And now, finally, you will face the consequences of your actions." Sir Nathaniel cleared his throat. "There is the matter of prosecution, Your Grace. Lord Valancourt is willing to press charges for the original theft. The penalties for stealing items of such value are severe, as you know. Transportation to the colonies, or possibly worse." Serafina felt the Duke's hand tighten on hers. This was it, the decision point. They could have Constance transported, effectively ending her life as thoroughly as Constance had ended Serafina's. It would be justice, of a sort, though nothing could truly balance the scales after 20 years. But as she looked at Constance, at the broken woman in the hard chair with terror in her eyes, Serafina found that her desire for absolute vengeance had transformed into something more complex. She wanted justice, yes. She wanted acknowledgement of the wrong done to her. But she did not want to become the kind of person who destroyed others as thoroughly as she herself had been destroyed. "Sir Nathaniel," she heard herself say, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "What if Lord Valancourt were willing to forgo formal charges in exchange for full restitution and a public confession of the truth about what happened that night at Almack's?" The magistrate looked at her with new respect. "That would be within his rights as the aggrieved party, Your Grace, though I confess I am surprised by your mercy given the circumstances." "It is not mercy," Serafina replied, looking directly at Constance. "It is self-preservation. I seek vindication, Your Grace, not ruination. My victory is the restoration of my own name, not the absolute destruction of hers. I will not become a tyrant in the name of justice. But make no mistake, cousin, you will confess publicly to what you did. You will face society knowing that everyone knows your crime, and you will live the rest of your life with the same stain on your reputation that I carried for 20 years. Constance's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks in earnest now. "You cannot," she whispered. "You cannot do this to me. I will be ruined, completely ruined. No one will receive me. I will be worse than invisible." "Yes," Serafina agreed quietly. "You will know exactly what you condemned me to. And perhaps, in the years to come, you will use that knowledge to become a better person than you have been." The arrangements were made that very night. Lord Valancourt, contacted at his club, agreed to Serafina's terms with enthusiasm that suggested he was highly pragmatic and eager for the restitution and public clarity offered. A statement was drafted, confession and apology combined, which Constance signed with trembling hands. The confession would be read 3 days later at Lady Arabella's ball, before an audience of hundreds who had gathered expecting entertainment, but instead witnessed justice. Constance was not present, having fled London the morning after her arrest, but her absence made the reading no less powerful. Lord Valancourt himself read the confession, his aristocratic voice carrying through the silent ballroom as he detailed Constance's crime and its decades-long cover-up. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Women gasped, men muttered angrily, and the social machinery of the ton immediately began to turn against the absent Constance. Within a week, Constance had been cut by every respectable hostess in London. Her name appeared on a published list of persons not welcome at Almack's, effectively barring her from the highest echelons of society. Her creditors, emboldened by her public disgrace, began pressing for immediate payment of debts she could not possibly satisfy. She would spend the rest of her life in genteel poverty, dependent on distant relations' charity, a cautionary tale whispered by mothers to daughters about the dangers of jealousy and malice. For Serafina, vindication came in 1,000 small moments. The respectful curtsy of Lady Sefton when they next met, the warm welcome from hostesses who had ignored her existence for 2 decades, the careful revision of social histories that now painted her as a victim of cruel circumstance rather than a shameful criminal. Her name was restored, her reputation rebuilt, and she found herself not merely accepted, but sought after. A duchess with a dramatic story of triumph over adversity. But perhaps the most satisfying vindication came 3 months after the reading of the confession, when she and the Duke attended a concert at Vauxhall Gardens. They sat in a private box, watching fireworks paint the night sky in showers of gold and silver. And she realized that somewhere in the performance and strategy, somewhere between vengeance and vindication, something genuine had taken root between them. "You're smiling," the Duke observed, his own expression softening as he watched her. "A real smile, not one of our calculated performances. I have not seen you truly smile in all the months we have been married." "I was thinking," she replied, "about how strange it is that the worst thing that ever happened to me led eventually to this moment. How if I had not been falsely accused, if you had not failed me, if I had not been exiled, we would never have had this second chance. And I find I would not trade this complicated, difficult, earned happiness for the easier joy we might have had at 21. He took her hand, raised it to his lips in a gesture that had become both public performance and private truth. "Nor would I," he said quietly. "I loved you then as a boy loves, carelessly and with the assumption that love would be easy. But I love you now as a man loves, knowing the cost and choosing to pay it anyway. And this love, hard-won and battle-tested, is worth far more than the untested devotion of our youth." The word love, spoken so simply, so directly, without calculation or strategy, made Serafina's breath catch. She looked at him in the flickering firelight, this Duke who had been her destroyer and her savior, her enemy and her ally, and found that her heart, frozen for so long, had finally begun to thaw. "Do you mean that?" she asked, needing to hear it confirmed. "I do," he replied without hesitation. "I fell in love with you again, watching you rebuild yourself from the ruin my error instigated. I fell in love with your strength, your dignity, your refusal to let injustice break you completely. And I find myself hoping that someday, when you have had time to heal, when you have taken what you need from this marriage, you might find it possible to love me in return." Serafina felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. "I think," she said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them, "that I have already begun. I did not want to, fought against it with everything I had, but somewhere between vengeance and vindication, somewhere in all our careful strategies and calculated performances, I began to see not the boy who failed me, but the man who is trying desperately to make amends. And that man, flawed and guilty and determined, is someone I find I could very much love. He closed the space between them then, his hand gentle as it cupped her face, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her previous kiss on their wedding day seem like a pale shadow. This was not performance, not calculation, not strategy. This was real and terrifying and absolutely right. When they finally drew apart, both of them slightly breathless, fireworks continued to explode overhead, painting their private moment in showers of light. Around them, the gardens hummed with life and laughter. But in their box, in the space they had carved out from pain and guilt and hard-won grace, there was only the two of them and the fragile, precious thing they were building together. "We have wasted enough time," the Duke said, his forehead resting against hers. "I spent 20 years punishing myself for my failure, and you spent 20 years surviving my betrayal. But we are here now, alive and together, and I propose we spend whatever years remain to us actually living rather than merely observing life." "Agreed," Serafina whispered, and sealed the promise with another kiss. They left London a week later, retreating to Montford Hall in Derbyshire to escape the continued social whirl and find some peace together. The countryside in late summer was glorious, all golden fields and blue skies, and Serafina found herself falling in love not just with the Duke, but with the life they were building together. They rode through his lands, visited the copper mines that were the source of his vast wealth, and spent long evenings in the library discussing everything from philosophy to poetry. He taught her about estate management and business affairs, including her in decisions that previous generations would have reserved for men alone. She taught him about literature and art, subjects he had neglected in his focus on duty and profit. And slowly, carefully, they learned to be married not just in name, but in truth. The physical intimacy came gradually, an extension of the emotional connection they were building. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, in every sense, it felt like a redemption for them both. On a crisp autumn evening 6 months after their wedding, Serafina stood at one of the great windows of Montford Hall, watching the sun set over the Derbyshire hills, and felt a peace she had not known was possible. The Duke approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest in a gesture that had become their private ritual. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Yes," she said, and meant it without reservation. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "We have built something good from all that was broken," he observed. "Something stronger for having been forged in adversity." She turned in his arms to face him, this man who had been her greatest enemy and had become her greatest love. "We have," she agreed, "and I find that I would not change a single moment of the journey, as painful as it was, because it led us here." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had been given a second chance and had chosen to seize it with both hands. The past could not be undone, the pain could not be erased, but it could be transformed into something new. Love in their maturity, built on honest acknowledgement of failure and genuine effort at redemption, proved more durable than the untested passion of their youth. And in the years that followed, as they built a life together that encompassed not just vindication, but genuine joy, Serafina learned that sometimes the longest road leads home, and that love, when given a second chance, can bloom even in the hardest soil. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story of second chances and hard-won redemption touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who believes in the power of forgiveness and transformation. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, justice, and hope.